Everyone knows that the Allied invasion of Europe succeeded because of overwhelming air power and a limitless supply of men. What the history books leave out is what actually decided it. The true turning point was a psychological collapse triggered not by enemy fire, but by a profoundly terrifying realization about how the enemy chose to fight. Oberfeldwebel Johann Fischer sits on the engine deck of his camouflaged assault gun, running a grease-stained thumb over a thick, graying mustache. He is an old man for this war, 48 years of age, a survivor of Poland, the first fall of France, and 3 brutal winters on the Eastern Front. He knows exactly how an army breathes, how it bleeds, and how it starves. To Fischer, war is a harsh craft, measured in scarce resources and raw human endurance. If you've made it this far, hit like. It helps the algorithm more than you'd think. It is the summer of 1944, hidden deep within the suffocating hedgerows of Normandy. Fischer and his crew have spent the morning doing precisely what they have spent years perfecting: killing armor. From a carefully prepared ambush, they destroyed 3 American tanks in a matter of minutes. The American approach felt clumsy, almost insulting. The green crews advanced down predictable roads, bunched together, treating the lethal terrain as if it were a training ground. For a seasoned veteran like Fischer, a man steeped in a military tradition that demanded independent tactical brilliance, these opponents seemed pitifully soft. They looked like civilians in uniform, amateurs trying to master a deadly profession they simply did not understand. This observation bred a deep, quiet contempt among the German ranks. Fischer and his men had survived the relentless, primal meat grinder of the Soviet advance. They knew how to cannibalize shattered engines in the freezing mud, how to hold a line when they were outnumbered 10-1, and how to stretch a single day of rations into 4. They considered themselves the ultimate technicians of war, artists of scarcity, who believed that superior willpower and disciplined aggression would always break an inexperienced foe. Fischer exhales a cloud of cigarette smoke, resting his scarred hands on his knees. The afternoon is unnervingly quiet. The Americans have pulled back, predictably retreating after losing their vanguard. According to every tactical manual Fischer knows, the enemy should now be disorganized, fearful, and paralyzed for at least a day. But as a strange, heavy mechanical hum begins to build from the valley below, Fischer tilts his head, the professional satisfaction slowly draining from his weathered face. Because what is rolling up that narrow dirt track does not sound like a retreat, and it absolutely does not belong in the war he understands. To understand why Fischer felt absolute disdain for the arriving Americans, you have to understand the forge that made him. By the time his unit deployed to the dense foliage of northern France, Fischer was no longer merely a soldier. He was a highly calibrated instrument of an army that had spent 3 years fighting a brutal, relentless war of attrition in the East. In the freezing mud outside Kharkov in 1942, Fischer absorbed the core philosophy of the Wehrmacht: mission-type tactics. A commander did not hand down a detailed, rigid timetable for how to take a village. He simply pointed to the village and expected his non-commissioned officers to figure out the method. The system demanded independent thought, rapid adaptation, and sheer tactical ruthlessness. If a man could not think for himself while taking fire, he died.
This brutal filter produced tank crews that communicated almost entirely in silence. Fischer's gunner knew exactly where to aim just by the shift in Fischer's weight. His driver could angle the heavy steel hull to deflect incoming armor-piercing rounds entirely by instinct. They functioned as a closed, perfect ecosystem. They survived because they had to be exceptional. The German war effort possessed absolutely no surplus. Every tank lost was a permanent wound to the battalion. Every veteran killed was a library of tactical knowledge burned to the ground. They fought with the arrogant certainty of men who knew their individual skill was the only true currency on the battlefield. When intelligence briefings described the Americans as an army of factory workers and clerks, soft men who relied on overwhelming numbers because they lacked a true warrior spirit, Fischer believed it. The assessment made perfect sense. The Americans built armies the same way they built automobiles, assembling identical, easily replaceable parts. But a war, Fischer knew, is not won on an assembly line. It is won by men who have mastered the grim art of killing. Yet as he sits on his idling machine, staring at the dust rising from the valley floor, that hard-won certainty begins to fracture. The low, heavy rumble vibrating through the earth does not belong to a cautious, shattered enemy regrouping for a standard counterattack. It sounds like an entire industrial city is moving toward him. If this video got you thinking, subscribe. I cover stories like this every week. Fischer lifts his heavy binoculars. Through the scratched lenses, he does not see a cautious infantry probe or a flanking maneuver. He sees trucks. Heavy cargo trucks, painted olive drab, rolling bumper to bumper down the battered road. He counts 10, then 20, then 50. They move with a terrifying mechanical rhythm. On the Eastern Front, a supply column was a desperate human endeavor. Draft animals dragged carts through the mud, and exhausted men fought over every drop of fuel. But this American column operates like a conveyor belt. The trucks arrive behind the ridge, disgorge massive crates of ammunition, fuel, and rations, and immediately wheel around to head back toward the beaches. Nobody shouts panicked orders. Nobody waits for stragglers. The process simply runs. Through the magnification, Fischer watches the Americans deal with one of the tanks his crew disabled hours earlier. A German maintenance team would spend 3 sleepless nights trying to salvage a ruined transmission under enemy fire. The Americans do not even attempt to repair. A heavy recovery vehicle simply drags the smoking hull into a ditch to clear the road. Less than an hour later, a brand new machine rolls into its exact position. This is the paradox that chills Fischer to the bone. He and his crew are master craftsmen of combat, treating every single artillery shell as a precious, irreplaceable asset. The Americans treat 30-ton armored vehicles as disposable commodities. Fischer realizes he is not observing a traditional military unit fighting a tactical war. He is watching a sprawling, continent-sized corporation
executing a demolition project. For a German army running on horse-drawn wagons and ideological fervor, witnessing this industrial monster breathe paralyzes the mind. The professional recognition settles in Fischer's chest like a physical weight. He can execute the perfect ambush every single time. But how many flawless shots does it take to kill a factory? As summer bleeds into autumn, Fischer's kill tally climbs to numbers that would have earned him the highest commendations just 1 year earlier. His gunner rarely misses. His driver navigates the collapsing front lines with flawless precision. Yet, they are constantly moving backward.
Fischer destroys 5 Sherman tanks on a Tuesday, only to face a wall of 10 fresh machines on Wednesday. He finally understands the terrifying math of this new conflict. His tactical brilliance does not stop the American advance. It merely dictates the price the Americans pay for the ground. And they possess an infinite budget. The Wehrmacht built its entire theory of survival around the irreplaceable human being. A German crew had to be perfect because their military machine provided absolutely no safety net. But the American system operated on the exact opposite principle. They built a colossal, resilient apparatus designed specifically so the men inside it did not need to be exceptional. The United States military planned for human error, calculated the exact rate of battlefield destruction, and constructed a supply chain that outpaced death itself. They made the individual machine expendable so the relentless forward momentum could remain immortal. Fischer sits exhausted against the cold steel of his tracks, watching another swarm of silver aircraft darken the western sky. He spent a lifetime enduring the absolute worst horrors of the Eastern Front to forge himself into the ultimate weapon. He optimized every reflex and sharpened every instinct to survive a war where individual mastery meant everything. But the men crossing the ocean simply refused to fight that war. Fischer realizes he is not fighting the green, frightened boys inside the American tanks. He is fighting the steel mills of Pennsylvania and the endless assembly lines of Detroit. He mastered the art of killing men, but as the ground shakes with the approach of another endless armored column, he faces a devastating truth. No matter how flawlessly he aims, a cannon cannot bleed a factory to death. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Always genuinely curious about this audience.